Yo, 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 what's up, everyone? This is Aaron Nance with
Dr. Jeffrey Foster.
Jeffrey Foster.
Dr. Foster.
And we are
Disturbing the
Peace. Here we talk about critical issues related to urban education and minoritized and marginalized students as we work to change their future trajectories as it relates to their own education and their own experiences.
Correct. I definitely echo that because this is important work that we're doing and important work that we do and important work that you do as teachers, educators, and advocators for minoritized, marginalized, and historically underrepresented populations.
Speaking of that, I was I read a lot on LinkedIn, y'all. So if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, it's aaron.nets. You can be able to find me, search me up on LinkedIn. But I do a lot of reading on LinkedIn. And on my LinkedIn page, I saw that there's this guy who has everybody who's an educator. If you have a master's in education, or most people have EDDs. I don't see too many people with a PhD doing it, but most people have an EDD or a master's in education has like a consulting business.
I know, yeah.
Everybody's a consultant now. Everybody's an expert. You got 2 years of experience, got a master's, now you're a consultant. Okay, whatever. Anyway, so I'm reading this post of this black male who has a consulting business specifically geared towards urban students. And from what I was reading, he targeted low-income black communities, specifically Title I schools.
Yeah.
The problem of that is the fact that he used urban to identify black students when in fact that's not what urban means. So when we're talking about minoritized and marginalized populations, there are so many categories and subcategories of ethnicities that are being marginalized and that are being underserved, and we have to understand and acknowledge that. And so it's not just we have to debunk or unlearn this notion of urban means black, because it doesn't. Or minoritized or marginalized or underdeserved means black. I mean, yes, they are a part of the population that are continuously discriminated against more than any other racial group in the country. That is true. However, we also have Asian Americans, we have Native Americans, we have Latinas, we have Latinos, we have Latinx, we have Chicana groups, we have all these different
groups, ethnicity groups, and then we also have minoritized groups which includes the LGBTQ, and then females. There's a lot of other marginalized groups as well that fits into the realm of urban.
Right, and so we have to understand and remember that urban it's not one category of individual people, no matter what the people are who you describing as urban. So if you are an Asian American and you describing just Asians as urban, then that's incorrect. And the same goes for Pacific Islander, Alaska, whatever ethnicity that somebody choose to identify.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I want to talk a little bit about internalized racism. We did have a situation the other day. We were actually trying to record a podcast episode, and we were discriminated against. And, being a black male, you're always discriminated against. You're always running into microaggressions every day.
Yeah.
And even by your own people. And so we had a scenario the other day, and I was not happy not having it. A lady said that I felt like, no, I didn't feel. She said that we were a threat to safety and security. And I was like, really? Do you want to talk more about that?
So one of the things that we like to do in the past, and I guess it was a little bit nostalgic yesterday, is we will go to the Ritz-Carlton in Uptown Charlotte. As you guys know, we based in Charlotte, North Carolina. So if you're in Charlotte, you want to join the podcast, please hit us up. But Charlotte, North Carolina, and it's a really nice event, especially really nice venue, especially during the holidays. Christmas tree, it's very festive event. And so usually before we sit down to do anything, we tend to go up and play the baby grand piano. I think you posted something on our TikTok,
yes.
right, about
Mm-hmm.
us playing. So if you want to go view a little bit what we're talking about, please go visit our TikTok page, Disturbing the Peace, as well. So anyway, we go up, we in our normal form, just playing the piano, and a lady, I think her name was Angela. Miss Angela came out of nowhere
Mm-hmm.
and stopped us in our tracks and pretty much questioned us as to why we were on that floor. Questioned us as to if we had a room there, if it was part of an event that were taking place,
Mm-hmm.
and that sort of thing. And there was a lot of uneasiness with the conversation.
Yeah.
Um, and so we started, me and Dr. Foster here started debunking, or I wouldn't even say debunking, but critically challenging the narratives in which was presented towards us.
The and the presumed and projected narrative that was thrown at us.
Yeah, so um, one, it made it seem like we wasn't good enough to be in the Ritz Carlton, but better yet, be on the floor where the event was taking place.
Yeah.
And we didn't care essentially what event was taking place. Like, what does that have to do with us right now at this moment, at this particular time? So the event was the Ritz Carlton hosted the executives of Bank of America. So if you've been to Charlotte, you know anything about Charlotte. I think it's the #1 banking capital. Is it next to New York and California? That's
It might be the number one, number two, top three.
It's top three. It's a top three area for banking. Most people come travel here. They move here for banking. You know, it's really popular. And so Bank of America is right down the street from, or in walking distance to the Ritz Carlton. So they had a lot of execs here and that sort of thing. And so the lady was an older black woman, Miss Angela, and she was a server to the event. And one thing that I'm learning is that in order to argue, or in order to not really debate, but to have certain conversations, you have to understand policy and you have to understand regulation.
Yeah.
It's not about feeling. It's not about feeling at all. I could feel some type of way because you made me feel that way, but in that type of setting, it's arguing about the policy. So the policy was at that particular time is that by us being up there, it was a security breach because one, we were not participants of the executive Bank of America event that they were having, and two, we did not have a room there. So therefore, in a sense, we did not belong in that hotel.
Yeah.
Hold on, I'm getting somewhere. We did not belong in that hotel. However, the hotel is open to the public as many hours as the hotel is open. And so Miss Angela was arguing for security breach, and I was just pretty much saying to her, well, your argument is flawed. And I was like, if the focus or concern is on security, then how come security didn't come and check our IDs, or how come security wasn't posted at the top? Where was security at this moment in time? You just happen to see two black boys or black males playing the piano at the Ritz Carlton, ironically or consequently, where they were having the executive dinner at, and you chose to say something to us at that moment at that time.
Yes, and these people were in conference rooms, like with doors, that has doors. We were in a common area on top of that. And one thing I just want to say is her choice of words. I'm always listening to people and what they say and how they say it. And she said, we're having, she said, it's not that, we're having prominent people on this floor. And I said, what do you mean by prominent? What makes someone prominent? And it was very offensive to me. Like, oh, because they're bank executives, that means they're prominent people. That means they're more important people.
More important than us.
Yeah.
At that particular time, and then I even said, I was like, oh, it's because we're black. And she was like, well, I'm black too.
Okay.
And I'm like, well, and that's another misconception, as if black people cannot be prejudiced against each other. You say it all day long. I mean, working at a college, you see a lot of nepotism, you see a lot of favoritism, you see a lot of black people here that favors other black people.
At HBCUs, not all HBCUs, but some.
Right.
And I think it might be something that's might be prominent and popular in small small HBCUs.
And let's just call it what it is. Let's call it what it is. We want to talk about it is true. The supremacy and the oppression and things of that nature. History tells us over and over again that we were and still live in a repressive society, and that notion is not going to change until we uproot 400 plus years that was handed to us.
That is true.
And our ancestors. So that will always continue to be a lingering effect or effect among Africans and people who have
of African descent.
Thank you, of African descent.
Yeah, and I definitely think that something we need to pay attention to that, because I want to do some more research on post-traumatic slave syndrome, because I really think that there's a lot of factors that play into who we are and how people view us. And then I can't stand when people say, oh, they want to talk about grit, centering around social emotional learning that focuses, on urban areas, and then they want to say, oh,
pull yourself up by your own
bootstraps. Yes, and then us people of color, we automatically have grit. I definitely agree with that. That's a circumstance and a factor associated with post-traumatic slave syndrome. But at the end of the day, we don't have to. Why do we have to continue to access that grit? Why do we have to pull ourselves up by the bootstrap all the time? Where's our grace?
Well, I believe, just going back in history, we have pulled ourselves up by our own bootstraps.
Yes.
Without black people, this country would not even exist.
That's true.
Everything. First of all, we have to understand and realize that our culture and heritage was stolen, number one, and most of the things that exist because the black people did it. Black people were the originators. They were the first humans to walk this earth. I don't know what your Eurocentric teachers are teaching y'all, or what your Eurocentric leaders and district leaders in K-12 education and how you run, or governors or district leaders. I don't know what kind of curriculum you guys are using, but everything has been changed and shifted to change the narratives. Think about it. When we talk about, if you don't believe me, think about it like this. With Governor Ron DeSantis rejecting the proposal for African American history classes to be taught, it's the reason why they don't want to teach the true history that had existed. That's why they're trying to ban it. What about these books? Not even books that's coming out about our culture, but books about the LGBTQ plus IA community, books about activists and advocates. And it's not only black authors, it's white authors as well that are also being banned. And so, obviously, something had to persist for them to say, oh, we're going to change the narrative, and it's not something we want to talk about. So much so, they made laws.
Yeah. Laws, that's why certain people need to be sitting at the table. And then people really, they want to say like, oh, we need to stop trying to participate in DEI. DEI is turning into a curse word. Diversity, equity, inclusion. You can't even use those terms at certain universities and organizations and things. It's just crazy.
I remember I actually attended a conference, and the conference I attended, we had to change the narrative around what we wanted to call it. So it was supposed to have been a conference on, like, for African American students, which I had a problem with, because it was supposed to be like a conference for colored people.
People of color.
Thank you, people of color.
Yeah.
But they didn't want to call it that, so they're like, oh, can we call it like the conference on colorism or? But eventually they came up with BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color, like BIPOC. Conference on color, which I also didn't like that as well, because when we talk about color and colorism, it spans so far and wide. It's not only black people or indigenous people. I mean, if we want to talk about it, we were the indigenous people.
Yeah.
Let's just be real. We were the indigenous people of this country.
We were the drivers of everything in the whole world.
That part.
Yeah, but colorism, well, I hate to interrupt, but I'm just thinking about like the fact we have to remember, and I hope you weren't getting to this, but we're all brown. And unless you're albino, but we're all different shades of brown.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So
yeah.
there's a wide spectrum, and I'm always talking about spectrums and continuums.
And then I'm glad you mentioned that. Jane Elliott conducted a sociology test with white students. It's called the Blue Eye Test. Please go check it out on YouTube. And I'm not going to tell you exactly what she did, but it brought up a lot of internal biases among these white students. And then she also has a conversation. Jane Elliott and Angela Davis actually has like a 45 to an hour conversation where they're just talking about race being a social construct and how that we inherit these internal biases. It's not. Some people can't argue that it's innate from a child. If you've been taught like black is bad or don't hang around black people or something like that, then you can be brought up with that sentiment. I'm sorry. One more thing.
Yeah, because I got a connection to that. I just want to say a connection right quick. When I was a classroom teacher, I used to always say, I tell my students, you can say, I have a text-to-self connection or a text-to-text connection, so on and so forth. So I got a self-to-literacy video text connection to what you just said. That happened to me. And don't lose your thought, because I like to go on random tangents, but I'm going to be quick with this. I'm a storyteller, y'all. But when I used to give piano lessons, and my piano student, who happens to be a student that has a white mom, who she's always worked in urban schools. She's all about urbanization. I love her to death, but we all have implicit biases. But long story short, the dad is he's from South America. He's a dark-skinned person, darker than me. And do you know, this student told me, he said, darker people are bad. And he said, Mr. Foster, you're not that dark, so I'm not going to say that you're bad. And I was like, oh my God. He was little. He was like 6 years old when he said that. Problematic. So that's a great example of what you were saying.
That is very problematic. And I was working at the school. It was a private Christian school. We have certain areas in Charlotte, North Carolina that are a little different than others, and that school was one of them. And I was probably there's probably like 5 black people there altogether. Again, private Christian school, very conservative in their views. And I remember we had a conversation. Well, we didn't have a conversation. The principal at that time had a conversation with us about race and what was race. And first of all, that's problematic in itself.
Yes.
That's problematic. You have a white male who was a pastor of a very conservative church talk to us about race. He went so much further to say that he brought up his own background and experiences of how his mother or his family grew up very Southern Baptist. And since they grew up Southern Baptist, they have certain ideologies, or I should say epistemologies, towards black people. So now you have this man in his like mid-50s giving a talk about race, brought up his upbringing and how that it was frowned upon. And so being at the school presented a lot of internal biases from their perspective. Here I am, a young black male teaching all white students. Now, I loved my students, y'all. I don't care what color you are. I don't care. You mentioned the shade. I don't care what shade you are. I mean, your perception, like you said, we are all brown. We all come from Africa. But, color is a social construct that society has given meaning. So most of these white students, and they were cool. I loved my students. Loved them to death. But there was a lot of internalized biases by me being there. It was like because I always show up as my authentic self. If you do not want me in a room, no, don't ask me to come somewhere if you do not want me in the room. Not the facade Aaron or not the code switching Aaron, not using certain code words. But if you don't want me to show up authentically, then don't ask me to come.
Yes,
Cause
period.
period. Because that's the only way I know how to be. It's my
Yeah.
authentic self. And as an educator, I'm always gonna show up authentic.
Yes, and it's so, and I hate to interrupt, but it's just so important to, you know, how people have to work really hard. Some people more than others have to work hard to bring their authentic self, and you come to a level of self-actualization, and people want to put yourself back in the box.
Right. Right.
I couldn't imagine.
Right. But I feel like that's how American society is this day. I feel like that we're not. There's a lot of colonialisms that are going on, but no, tell me straight up. You know, tell me exactly what it is that I need to know so I can be better off. I'm not saying you have to be. I'm not saying people have to be abrasive with it, but you can have a cool tongue and still speak in the manner in which your point can come across. And I feel like a lot of times in these organizations, they don't do that. I have a friend, and my friend just told me that she was let go from her job because of a white woman who insinuated something that was not true. Now, within her department, there's a lot. She said that there was a lot of people, a lot of black people, people of color there at the job, but because that, when it comes, all from what I heard from my black female friends, when it comes to black women, it's like, oh, you've been too aggressive, you've been too loud, all the stereotypes came up, and she was very outspoken, and then they let her go for that. So even showing up as your authentic self can also have consequences that are not fair. And that goes back to the internal biases that people have. But I feel like that if people were to start acknowledging their internal biases, then they can better work to cope with certain past traumas that have existed.
That is true, and then that's why it's important. And in a lot of our research that we've worked on, we've talked about a big part of participating in a higher level of consciousness is knowing thyself. And I feel that before you come to the world, you come to society, you come to work, especially when you're working with children and marginalized children, you have to know thyself, you have to reflect on yourself, you have to know your background. And there's this test called the Howard Implicit Bias Test. So it's important for everybody to take that test and reflect on it and participate in it and, get to the root causes of certain things.
Right, and I think you hit the hammer on the head. Get to the root cause of these, I'm going to call them societal issues because that's exactly what they are. Until you have done the work yourself, then you aren't any better than anybody else because you come into the classroom with the same ideology and the same perspectives. Now, again, I'm talking about any type of teacher, especially my black teachers. Like, all because you're black and you go to a classroom, that doesn't mean that you're helping. You could be damaging that child more because you're not able to identify yourself, or you identify yourself in other ways.
Or you're teaching based on how you were taught by a white teacher.
That part. So you still coming from a Eurocentric lens.
Yeah.
So it's not and at that time you still can be looked at as a white savior because you're still doing the same exact melancholy, monotonous things that you were presented with.
Yeah.
There was this teacher that I worked with, and she was of darker complexion, and she did not have good classroom management or control because I felt like she truly did not know how to identify because her complexion was darker than others. And so because her complexion was darker than others, I feel like she already had this internal bias or implicit bias about herself and how she perceived herself. And because she perceived herself to be darker or of a darker complexion than maybe her colleagues or her peers, she felt like she had to do certain things. For instance, in order for her to get control of her classroom, maybe she have to use her voice a little bit more. Or in order for her to do certain things, maybe she had to assert herself a little bit more because of how she viewed herself, but not how other people viewed her.
Wow. So she tried to fit herself into a certain. She felt like she had to fit herself in a certain stereotype to be taken serious because
Maybe.
of how she thinks people see her.
Right, but not how she see herself.
Yeah, and isn't that a connection to double consciousness?
It can be,
Yeah.
depending on how we're looking at it. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's internal bias, implicit bias is very important, and there are so many different subcategories. There's racism, there's colorism, there's the color complex. There's the even I remember I was watching a video about Muhammad Ali, and he was on a show. I want to say the Dick Van Dyke show. I'm not sure, but he was on this show, and he was just talking about the word Negro. And what he was saying about the word Negro, because he was like, oh, how does it feel being a Negro boss or a Negro this, Negro that? He was like, well, why do we have to put Negro into a category? He said, you have white. He said, white is white, Native American is Native American, Asian is Asian. He said that we're the only type of group where y'all stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't we just be people? Why we have to be? If your label is white or Asian American or Native American, then why do we have to be Negro?
Yeah.
That this is getting deep, y'all.
It is. It is. Because I just want to say that's the same thing. Like a lot of times, you will never hear someone say, "How does it feel to be a white basketball player?"
Right.
Or how does it feel? You're pretty for a white person.
Right.
You never hear that.
Right.
Or you're pretty for a lighter skinned person.
Right.
There's a lot of negativity towards darkness.
Right.
Yeah.
and what it means and everything of that nature. But I feel like it goes far beyond even when how it changed from the derogatory term that was used to describe black people to even mulattoes, even to Negroes, then color, and then people of color, and now African American,
and now black.
And now black. There was a term. So I was reading about this guy who was in a camp in Germany, and I'm not able to pronounce the word, but the word. So he was a black German, and it starts with I can't pronounce the word. I tried to pronounce it multiple times. I don't know, but it's a derogatory term in the German language, and it was used to describe a person who was black, but did not qualify to the standards of Germans at that time. So it's interesting how we talk about implicit bias and racism, but you have all these other subcategories that are also detrimental to people of color. And I'm sorry, I'll talk a lot. Dr. Foster always say I hijack conversations.
Sometimes, not every time.
Well, the last thing I'll say, Dr. Foster, you can wrap it up if you would like.
Okay.
Going back to colorism, there's this guy named Vincent Chin. I believe that he was, and I hope I'm saying this correctly. I think he was Chinese American. Did I say that correctly? Okay. I think he was Chinese American, and again, this is during the 80s, I believe. And at that time, the United States was in a state of going into a depression because with the automotive industry, or I think it was the automotive industry. And what was happening is that you have all these different ethnicities and races coming over to the United States to work.
Immigrating,
Yeah, immigrating. Thank you. Or migrating.
Yes.
Migrating to come and work.
That's a better term.
And so some people felt like they were taking the jobs from the people who were there. So, I'm sorry, Vincent Chin was an Asian American. My apology. He was an Asian American. And so what happened is two white guys just beat him up because they felt like they were taking the jobs from the ones that was already there. So I wonder what was the implicit biases that existed to make for this one Asian American to represent everybody who was taking jobs away from others who was already here in this country.
Well, There's a whole. I have a whole lot of thoughts around taking because the ownership, that ownership piece, power, privilege, and education. When certain people they think they own everything.
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
think they're entitled to everything.
Right.
And that's something that they need to focus on,
Right.
and society needs to focus on.
Right.
You don't own everything.
Right. Right.
You've gotten power, you've gotten privilege, and you've even gotten a education set up for you.
And most of the people who are the 1 or 2% has profited from the passive slavery.
Mm-hmm.
That's how these companies started. That's how you got money. And
college. I mean, some Ivy Leagues, like that book. What is it? Ebony and Ivy. That's a really good book. I recommend that for people to read.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So, anyway.
Yes, very good, very good. Well, this was definitely a very deep and fruitful conversation, and we want to hear what you all have to say. What are your thoughts about implicit biases and the plight of being a black individual within the United States? And
have you experienced this at your workplace? Have you experienced this among your black colleagues? Like, we would like to know your feedback.
Yes, and we also would like you to take some time to do the implicit bias test and really focus on yourself and learn to know thyself.
And I will also recommend the personality test as well.
Oh,
if you haven't done it, or if you have done it and it's been a couple of years, like maybe you've changed over time.
Yes, it's good to be well versed in who you are, how you present yourself to the world, and how the world sees you, and how you see yourself. So that's very important. We can provide some additional resources if you would like that. But until next time, y'all, we are signing out.
Thank you for watching another podcast with
Disturbing the Peace. Peace out.